Alright, sorry about the delay and the late start. I got tied up. Not literally. Nothing hot. Sorry. Though that might be nice. Some people are into that. Hmm. So, yeah, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays. I know they're all thrilling. I'm your intrepid narrator. I am forever intrepid, Fraggeth. And today we're going to read more Hellburner by C.J. Cherryh. Previously on. Geez, I don't even remember. Last week was a complete blur. Oh wait, it's not an unknown person. It's Edmund Pori. Pori. I don't remember who Pori is. The name's familiar. I'm pretty sure he features in Down Below Station. But apparently he's coming to the station. He is coming to Sol 2? Sol B? Yes, Sol B. Okay. Oh yeah, Dekker found out that his mom is involved in a lawsuit with Alice Salazar, Corey Salazar, his former partner's mother, who is on the Mars Corp board, possibly the head of the Mars Corp board. My brain's failing me on that one. As to the particulars, suffice it to say, she is wealthy, powerful, and very much has it in for Dekker and presumably his mother as well. Uh, so Dekker's in everything up to his eyeballs. Graff is really unsure who to trust. He doesn't trust the other people he used to be trusting, namely Saito and Dema. And he is feeling suspiciously like he's about to be the bagman for something, and is probably going to get all the blame and isn't too happy about it. Anyway, with that out of the way, that's what I can remember. There's probably a lot more, but my brain isn't telling me things right now, and it has been a whole week. And I've not had a chance to reread that portion. Okay. So without further ado, I'll get cracking. Incidentally, hi, Tyler Silverstein. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry I didn't mention you earlier. I really wish this thing had a timestamp. I thought it used to, but it doesn't now. Oh well. Chapter 9. Lt J.G. Jurgen Albrecht Graff, SB/admin, 2152 hours, June 24/23, FGO 5-9. Command of Sol B has been transferred to Fleet Ops. You are hereby ordered to render all appropriate assistance, including securing of files and records, under direction of Commander Edmund Pori. Commander? The hell? And Jean-Baptiste? Mazian's second senior? Thoughts ran down very scattered tracks since that message. Thoughts needed to, on an operational level. Tanzer was only marginally cooperative, communicating through his secretary. Basecom was a steady stream of query and scant reply from the UDC at Sol 1. One assumed. A great deal of it was going in code 1. A great deal of it was going in code 1 assumed Fleetcom couldn't breach. Tanzer had been blindsided, that seemed evident. And maybe Fleet Ops had had to keep the junior officer in the far dark to carry it off. But it was evident, at least as best he could put matters together, that the business with the committee and the general had been a flanking action. Try to stir up some chaff, maybe throw a rock into the Sol 1 hearings. Who knew? Certainly not the junior lieutenant. Possibly the number ones had. Certainly the captain had. and kept silent in spite of his repeated queries, which Saito, of course, had sent, the way he'd ordered Saito to do. Damn and damn. The deception shook him. You relied on a crew, you dumped all your personal chaff and trusted. That was what it came down to. You assumed, in throwing open everything you had, that you had some kind of reciprocity. Never mind the gray hair he didn't have. The fleet could decide he was expendable. The fleet could use him any way it had to. But they put you in charge. They made you what you thought were you made what you thought were rational decisions, and if the people who were supposed to be carrying out your orders weren't doing that, you trusted they'd at least trust you enough to tell you, before you assumed you had a power you didn't, and put yourself and them into a no-win. You did the best you could in a touchy situation, and they promoted Edmund Pori 2 ranks in the last year? God, what did the man do? The captains had to know Pori. Had to. Were they blind? But Nav 2 on Carina had a good head for strategic operations. Pori was back and forth to the belt. Pori was ferry captain on the carriers as they moved in for finish, which made him currently one of the most experienced with the ships, and Pori was probably working tight in with out-system and in-system surveillance. That had to be where he got the merits. Clever man. Clever man. Edmund Pori was, and clearly now, command track, which he himself would never be. Hyperfocus and macrofocus weren't the same thing. Not by a system diameter they weren't. So Pori had the stuff. Clear now how desperately they needed a mind of Pori's essential qualities. Clear now whose command he just might end up serving helm for. The captain hadn't trusted him. So they brought Pori in over his head? He didn't want to think about that. Instead, he arranged his priorities and issued his orders, trusting they were getting through. It gave him the same surreal feeling he'd had writing his will for the handful of personal possessions he did own. That past the time those instructions were carried out, his personal existence was going to be very much different. He had ordered the records secured. That first. There were a lot of extremely upset UDC security personnel on the loose. There had very nearly been an armed standoff. The UDC ordered erasure on certain files, he was quite certain. He was equally certain he had been too late to prevent that, during the time of the standoff, and queries flying back and forth between his office and Tanzer's. He was sure UDC security had done exactly what they should have done, and that he had not been able to prevent it. Although outside of going hand to hand with UDC personnel and cutting through a lock, he didn't know what he could have done. Would be written down for a failure on his part. Let's try that sentence again, because that's actually a very long sentence, with a big parentheses chunk in the middle. Let's try that again. He was equally certain he had been too late to prevent that. During the time of the standoff and queries... Wow, okay. He was equally certain he had been too late to prevent that. During the time of the standoff and queries flying back and forth between his office and Tanzer's, he was sure UDC security had done exactly what they should have done, and that he had not been able to prevent it, although outside of going hand to hand with UDC personnel and cutting through a lock he didn't know what he could have done, would be written down for a failure on his part. There we go, that's a little better. Still chopped and mangled, but whatever. He had not let them throw the database into confusion. That was a plus. He had not lost the library tapes. That also. He had ordered personnel in detention transferred. He had taken hospital and testing records under fleet protection. He might order the release of detainees, but the disposition of those cases as a policy issue was not within his administrative discretion. He did not like the new commander. He, however, did not personally approve of creating administrative messes, which, counting his administrative style and Pori's, might be the worse for the difference. He advised the UDC officers that all facilities were passing under Fleet Administrative Command, and personally phoned the UDC Provost Marshal and UDC Legal Affairs to be certain that all legal proceedings were frozen exactly where they were. No sense letting anything pass into record that need not. Demas called to say that the carrier was braking, directly after ceasing acceleration. Demas said there was a contingent of Marines aboard needing gravitied accommodations. I copy that. What's the head count? 2,000. That was a carrier's full troop complement. They wanted miracles. He called Tanzer, he listened to the shouting, he calmly requested invention, and ordered an emergency galley set up in an idle Solcorp module, ordered its power-up, ordered an Intellitron communications center linked in as fleet-com relay for the Marine officers, ordered the fleet gym given over to troop exercise, the fleet exercise schedule combined with the UDC, on alternate days, located every Class 4 storage can in Sol 2, shifted all Class 4 storage to Low G, and ordered station ops to consolidate the remainder and clear Section D2 for setup as habitation. Sol 2 civil ops bitched and moaned about the access critical supplies. I assure you, he said coldly and courteously, I appreciate the difficulty, but human beings have priority over galley supplies. That is a problem. I suggest that you move your dispenser equipment to 3-deck to handle it. There are bottles and carts available. Then get them from maintenance, or we'll order them. I'm sure you can solve that. Meanwhile, the thin, nervous voice of approach control tracked the carrier's braking, in a tone that said approach control wasn't used to these velocities. Inner System wasn't a place merchanters ever moved at anything like that V. Meaning velocity. It's a italicized V. That kind of V. Merchanters drifted into the mother system at a sedate, mind-numbing leisure, sir, while bored techs and mechanics did whatever repair they'd had on backlist. Days and days of it, because the mother system with all its traffic had regulations. And a starship, which necessarily violated standard lanes, made mother system lawyers very anxious. The mother system was a dirty system. The mother system had a lot of critical real estate. The mother system had never accurately figured the astronomical chances of collision, and the Earth Company had made astronomically irritating regulations, which they now saw exceptioned. That was the word for it. Exceptioned for military ships under courier or combat conditions. The ECS-4 wasn't even at hard stretch. But Station was anxious. If braking utterly failed, astronomically unlikely, that carrier would pass, probably, 50 meters in the clear. But tell them that in the corridors, where the rumor was, security informed him, that the carrier was aimed straight at them. Pori, the bastard, might shave that to 25 meters, only because he hated Earth's system. But Pori never said that in outside hearing. Pori had other traits, but leave those aside. Pori was a strategist, and a good one, and that, apparently, was the priority here. Not whether Edmund Pori gave a damn about the command he'd been given. Not whether he had any business commanding here over these particular mindsets. The Shepherds were his crews, damn it, down to the last 2 women the captain or someone had finagled in here. Fingers hesitated over a keypad. The captain, or someone. Anyone in Sol System must have known more than he had. What in hell was going on? He had a call from Mitch Mitchell on the wait list. He returned it only to ask, "Where are you?" "Sir?" Mitch asked. "What's going on? What's—" He said, "Where are you?" Mitch said, "Your office in 2 minutes." "You don't read, Mitch. Where?" "Coffee machine in 1." Not that long to work a carrier into dock, not the way they'd learned it in the Beyond, especially when it was a tube link and a straight grapple to a mast. The carrier used its own docking crew, Marines, who simply moved the regular staff aside. More and more of them. A familiar face or two. Graff recognized them, if he couldn't place them. Carina dockers. Mazian's own crew. A lot of these must be. Lynch, the sergeant major, identified himself, close-clipped, gray-haired, with no ship patch on his khaki and gray uniform, but Graff recalled the face. He returned the salute, took the report, and signed it for transmission of station-secure condition. More of them were coming off the lift. "Sergeant Major," he said, with a misgiving nod in that direction, "we've had a delicate situation. Kindly don't antagonize UDC personnel. We've got a cooperation going that should make your job easier." "The commander said take the posts. We take 'em, sir." He frowned at the sergeant major, darkly, kept his hands locked behind him so the white knuckles didn't show. "You also have to live here, Sergeant Major, possibly for a long while. Kindly don't disturb the transition we have in progress. That also is an order." A colder face. A moment of silence. Estimation, maybe. "Yes, sir," Lynch said. Carina man for certain. Dangerous man. Close to Mazian. Lynch moved off, shouted orders to a corporal. Steps rang in unison. Breath steamed in the air in front of the lift. Marines were headed for the communications offices, the administrative offices, the life support facilities, simultaneously. The lift let out again. Armored security and a scowling, close-clipped black man in a blue dress jacket. Oh, right. Pori's the guy who showed up at the end of Heavy Time and basically shanghaied command of R2 from EarthCorp, or Aztecs, as the case may be. They're all like one umbrella corporation or something. Graff stood his ground and made his own bet whether Pori would salute or put out a hand. It was the hand. Graff took it and said, "Commander."
"Lieutenant, good to see you."
He might have been remarking on the ambient temperature.
"I take it the report is in our banks."
It should be. I take it you heard about the inter-service incident. We have personnel in the brig."
"The colonel's office,"
Pori said, shortly, and motioned him curtly to come along. Sorry, I honestly don't remember what voice I used for Pori before, so I'm spitballing. Quiet in the cell block, deathly quiet for a while. Then someone yelled, "Hey, Paulie!" "Yeah? You know that 5 you owe me?" "Yeah." "Cancel it. You got that sumbitch." "That sumbitch is in here," another voice yelled. "That sumbitch is gonna whip you good, Basrami." "Yeah, you got a big chance of doing that, Charlie boy. How was dessert?" Your guy can't navigate an aisle. What's he good for, him and those female pilots? Couple of belter whores, what I hear." Dekker stood at the bars, white-knuckled. Ben could see it from where he sat. From down the aisle, Meg's high, clear voice. "You a pilot, Cher, or a mouth?" "You come in here to save Dekker's ass? Bed's what you're for, honey. It's where you better stay." Ben winced. Meg's voice. "Fuck yourself, Charlie boy, but don't fuck with me. What are you, a tech or a pilot?" "Pilot, baby, and you better stay to rock picking. You're out of your league." Chorus of derision from one side of the cell block. Shouts from the other. Dekker hit the crossbar with his fist, muscle standing hard in his jaw, and from down the row, Meg shouted, "You got a bet, Charlie boy!" Wasn't any way she wouldn't take a challenge like that. Her and Sal. Ben felt his gut in a knot, saw Dekker lean his head against the bars, not saying anything. That was the danger signal in Dekker. And somebody down the row yelled, "Hey, Dekker, you hearing this?" Shouting over the top of it. Dekker had to answer, had to, way the rules worked, and Ben held his breath and crawled off the bunk, not sure what he was going to do if Dekker blew. "Dekker, you hear?" Man couldn't talk. Ben added those numbers fast, yelled out, "He's ignoring you, mouth! You're boring!" "Funny he had a lot to say when Chad bought it. That right, Dekker? That right?" Ben shoved his arm, not hard. Dekker was frozen, hard as ice, staring into nothing. Other guys were yelling. Something hit the middle of the aisle and rattled to a stop. And Dekker looked like a guy hit in the gut, wasn't saying anything, wasn't defending himself, was letting others do it. Another shove wasn't going to push him into thinking. God only knew what it might do. He had the look of a man on the edge of cracking, and Ben didn't know what to do with him. He didn't know how to answer the catcalls and the shouting that was going on. He hoped to hell for the MPs to come in and break it up. Wasn't any more from Meg. He could hear Sal's voice in the middle of it, but he had a desperate feeling he was in a cell with half a problem and Sal had the other half. "Hey, Custard Charlie!" someone yelled. "You want to run the Sims full hours? Take you on." That was a hit. Belters tagged you and you stayed tagged until you burned it off. And then it could come back years later. "Take you on, take Dekker and his women on, any day, any day. What about it, Dekker? You got a voice, pretty boy? Where's your ladies?" Ladies included one UDC shavehead in the mix, Ben figured, but he wasn't going to get into it. Wasn't his business. Wasn't going to win a thing. But Dekker came alive then, shouting, "We got enough of that attitude, mister. We got too damn many dead with that attitude. I liked Chad, you hear me, you son of a bitch? I liked him all right. It was your own CO set him up." Dekker's voice cracked. He wasn't doing highly well right now, but at least the jaw had come unwired. He hit his fist on the bars, turned around, and said to the ceiling or the walls, Ben didn't think it was to him, "God, they're making me crazy! They're trying to make me crazy!" Wouldn't touch that line, Ben told himself, and held his breath, just stood out of the way while Dekker walked the length of the cell and back. "Hey, Dekker!" another voice yelled. "You son of a bitch! Was that your mama on the news?" Shit. Dekker was at the bars, and that knot was back in his jaw. "You want to discuss it? Is that Sook?" Or rather, "You want to discuss it? Is that Sook?" "No way!" another voice yelled out. "Sook's not guilty. That was J-Bob." Catcalls went one way and the other. Shouting racketed up and down the hall until, starting with the far end, it got suddenly quiet. Quiet traveled. Ben leaned against the bars and tried to see what was going on, and all he could make out was UDC uniforms and MPs. "That's better," someone said. "Keep it quiet. Fleet personnel are being released." A cheer went up. "To fleet security for your own officers to sort out. You'll file outside. You'll give the officers your full name, your serial number, your rank in that order. You'll be checked out and checked off." "Where do I go?" Ben muttered, suddenly with the notion he didn't necessarily want to go into a pool of UDC detainees with a grudge. Shit, where do I go? "You go with me," Dekker said. "You're in our barracks. You go with me." Doors had started opening. You could hear the clicks and the guys moving out. Their door clicked. Dekker shoved it and they both walked out. Walked down the hall toward the MPs, and it was only UDC guys left in the cells on the right, staring at them. "They're not going to let me out," Ben kept thinking. "They're not going to let me out of here." "Ron Flock, aren't you?" an MP asked him. But the other said, "That's all right, that's Pollard." It wasn't highly all right. Hell if it was. He was all but shaking when they got through the doors and out of the cell block, into the outer hall where, sure enough, a couple of fleet security officers were waiting with a checklist. Dekker, Dekker muttered, Paul F., and didn't get further than that before the senior officer said, Dekker, go with the man. You Pollard? Ben nodded, saw one of the security officers motion Dekker toward another set of doors, saw Dekker look at him, and had this panicked sudden notion that if he let Dekker off alone, something stupid was bound to happen. Q and the lieutenant had tagged him with Dekker, and the only way to ensure Dekker didn't drag him into worse trouble was to stay with him. Excuse eye on him. Lieutenant's orders. Highest card he knew. But the guy said, You have the commander's orders to go to your barracks and stay put until further notice. The lieutenant's not in command now. Commander Pori is. He must have done a take. He felt his heart stop and start. Commander Pori? Follow orders, mister. This whole station's under the commander's orders. The UDC command's been set aside. He wasn't the only one in the area now. Mason and Paulie had shown up under escort. Hot damn, Mason said. But Ben thought, with a sinking feeling, Oh my God. Graff was extremely glad he didn't have to hear what happened inside what had, until an hour ago, been his office. Occasional words came through the closed door while he stood outside in the hall with Tanzer's aide, Andrews, neither of them looking at each other, with MPs and fleet security at their respective ends of the corridor. It was not a happy situation. He didn't like Tanzer, but he felt only discomfort in seeing the man finally walk out of the office white-lipped and red-faced. Tanzer swept up Andrews and walked back the way he had come, with, as Graff understood Pori's intentions, no transfer out of here, no resignation accepted, and a hard copy of an order from Geneva that in effect put Edmund Pori in charge of Tanzer's office and Tanzer's program. He still didn't know how it had happened, or what might have shifted in the halls of power, as the captain would put it. He hadn't talked to Dima or Saito in any informality, hadn't exchanged anything with them but ops messages as they coordinated internal security with marine details and Pori's own fleet security force. And not a word even yet from the captain, which might be because he didn't rate one in their list of priorities, but which left him wondering again, what wasn't perhaps wise to wonder. Since Pori had issued no request for him, since Andrews and Tanzer were gone, he walked down to the intersection of the corridors and to the mess hall, only observing the temper of things. There were very few out and about, but security and aides. Tone down the dress, he'd advised Mitch, between you and me, but pass it on. Things are going to shift. Minimum flash. Minimum noise for the next few days. Observe this man before you make any push at him. Do you read me? I'm not supposed to be telling you this. If it gets out that I did, it will be to my damage. Do you understand me? Longest solemn silence he'd ever gotten out of Mitch. Then Mitch had tried to ask him specifics. Who is this guy? What in hell, excuse me, Lieutenant, but what in hell's going on with the program? Apparently, he'd thought to himself, politics of a very disturbing bent. But he'd said to Mitch, I don't know yet. It's a wait-see. For all of us. He went to the mess hall, as the most likely place to find anyone out of pocket, anyone who had missed the barracks order, or thought he was the universal exception. An attitude more likely with Belters than with UDC or Merchanters, and he was resolved none of his trainees was going to get swept up by security. None of his had met Pori's idea of security. None of his own security people got nervous at a joke. Ease off, they'd say. That's enough. They'd call the Belter in question by name or nickname, like as not, and get a generally good-natured compliance. Not now. Not with these men, not with Lynch. He didn't know where they'd pulled this particular batch of Marines in from, where they'd pulled this particular batch of Marines in from, but they didn't have the look of basic training. Fleet Command had pulled something in from the initial setup squads. He'd bet on it, though he'd have to get into fleet records to find out. But these weren't 18-year-olds. They weren't green, and they sized up an officer they didn't know before they even thought about following his orders. Merchanters, maybe, but serving as line troops when the fleet needed every skilled spacer they could recruit? His stomach was upset. He carted a soft drink out of the machine and spotted a pair of Marines at the administrative entrance, the galley office. What did they think? The cooks were going to take the cutlery to the corridors? Exactly why those guards were standing there. Damned right. Tell it to Pori that the guys weren't going to go for the knives. Tell it to Lynch. A sight too much real combat readiness and overreaction in the ambient, thank you. A sight too much readiness in these troopers for any feeling that things were safe or under control. JG? Oh, whoops, sorry, it's Dimas. JG? Dimas, behind him. He took a breath and a drink, and disconnected expression from his face before he turned around. We're on standby, he said, disapproving Dimas leaving the ship unofficered before he so much as realized they weren't on the Whoa. I skipped a line. Before he so much as realized they weren't the primary ship at station any longer. Dimas said, Long John's on. We've got a while. He nodded, tried to think of somewhere pressing to go, or something he had else to do, rather than discuss the situation with Nav 1. You all right, Helm? As if he were a child. Or a friend. I'm tired, he said, which might cover his mood, but it sounded too much like a whimper. He didn't like that. He didn't like Dimas conning him. He said, point blank, How much of it did you know? Dimas' face went very sober, very quickly. It took a moment before he said, Not who. He hadn't expected honesty. He hadn't expected that answer. So Dimas wasn't happy with the new CO either. And Dimas was indisputably the captain's man. That came clear of a sudden. He asked, under the noise of the heat pumps, When did this get arranged? And watched Dimas avoid his eyes. I have to remember rules. Grammar rules. Or look anxiously toward the Marines, who might have security audio. He realized that of a sudden. Damn, he wasn't thinking in terms of hostile action. It was their own damned side, for God's sake. But Dimas was clearly thinking about it. And Dimas was the captain's man. Dimas said in a low, low voice, The company pulled every string it had in every congress on the planet. You want to go out to the ship, JG? Of a sudden, he had a totally paranoid notion that Dimas and Saito might be reeling him in for good, getting him where he couldn't get into trouble, where he couldn't cause trouble. Arrest? He asked himself. Have I done that badly? Or been that completely a fool?
Hear this, the comm said suddenly. This station and all station facilities, civilian and military, have passed under Fleet Tactical Operations by action of the Joint Legislative Committee. Military command has been transferred as of 1400 hours this date to the ranking fleet officer. Let me introduce myself. I am Commander Edmund Pori. I am not pursuing the inter-service incident that marred the station's record this afternoon. I am releasing all personnel from detention with a reprimand for conduct unbecoming.
The glove first.
But let me serve notice that this is the only amnesty I will ever issue in this command. There are no excuses for failure, and there is no award for half right. If you want to kill yourselves, use a gun, not a multi-billion-dollar machine. If you want to fight hand-to-hand, we can ship you where you can do that. And if you want to meet hell, gentlemen, break one of my rules and you will find it in my office. Senior officers of both services meet at 2100 hours in briefing room A. This facility is back on full schedules as of 0100 hours in the upcoming watch. Your officers will brief you at that time. Expect to do catch-up. If there are problems with this, report them through chain of command. This concludes the announcement.
He looked at Demas, saw misgiving, saw worry. He thought about that request to go up to the ship and said, Nav, I understand these people. I've worked with them. You understand? I don't want any mistake here. Demas looked at him a long moment, frowned, maybe reading him, maybe thinking over his options, under whatever orders he had, from the captain, from God only knew. Gigi, Demas started to say, but there were guards. But there were the guards who might well be mic'd. Demas put a hand on his arm, urged him toward the door, toward the corridor, and there wasn't an office to go back to, unless you could get one through Pori's staff. Demas' hand stayed on his arm. He had a half-drunk cup in his other hand. He finished it, shoved it in the nearest receptacle as they passed. Demas said, in a low voice, Helm, be careful. Squeezed his arm till fingers bit to the bone. Too much to lose here. The shepherds'll blow. One of them's going to end up his example. If you want to lose the program, Nav. Too much to lose, Demas repeated, and a man would be a fool to ignore that cryptic a warning. He let go a breath, walked with less resistance, but no more cheerfully, and after a moment Demas dropped his hand and trusted his RST to walk beside him. You're okay, Warren. Other than Commander Pori showing up from from the previous book, showing up with a 2-rank promotion and pretty much doing exactly what he did in Heavy Time, just like taking over the show. You haven't missed much. They're dealing with the repercussions.
Ensign Dekker,
The man said, letting him into Graff's office. But it wasn't Graff at the desk. It was Pori, for God's sake, with a commander's insignia. Didn't know how Pori was here, didn't know why it wasn't Graff standing there, but it was fleet, it was brass, and he was saluted it, lacking other cues. He'd dealt with Pori before, had had a 2-minute interview with the man on the carrier coming out from the belt, and he didn't forget the feeling Pori had given him then. Didn't find it different now. Like he was somehow interesting to a man whose attention you just didn't want.
Ensign Dekker,
Pori said, with his flat, dark stare.
how are you?
Fine, sir.
That's good.
Somehow nothing could register good in that deep, bone-reaching voice.
Here you had a run-in with the Sims.
Yes, sir. Long silence then, while Pori looked him up and down, with a skin-crawling slowness a man couldn't be comfortable with. Then,
Bother you?
I'm not anybody's target, sir.
And you lost your crew.
Yes, sir.
Here they were good. Here Wilhelmsen was.
Yes, sir.
So what are you?
Nerves recently shaken, shook. He didn't know what the answer was, now. He said, I want to fly, sir.
What are you, Dekker?
Good, sir.
You're going back in that chair. Hear me? You're going to go back in and you're going to forget what happened here. You want to fly?
Yes, sir.
Then you do that. You take the crew we've put together for you and you get back in that sim and you do it. You hear me?
He wasn't thinking clearly. Nobody he'd ever been in a room with gave him the claustrophobic feeling Pori did. He wanted this interview over. He wanted out of this office. He wasn't up to this.
Do you hear me, Dekker?
Yes, sir, he said.
Then you go do that. I want results. You say you're the best. Then do it. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir, he said.
You're dismissed.
Yes, sir, he said again, and then remembered Meg, and Ben, and Sal. But with another crew, sir, than the one I've been given.
The fleet's assembled the crew you have at cost and expense, Ensign Dekker. We're told they're good. We'll see it proved, or we'll see it disproved. In the field.
They're not ready, sir. He shoved himself forward, leaned on the desk, and stared Pori in the face. They haven't had the year I've had. They're not up to this. They haven't flown in a year at least.
Pori said, That's what the sims are for.
What are you after, a body count? People didn't talk to Pori that way. He saw the slight surprise in Pori's eyes, and something else, something that chilled him, before Pori said,
I'm after whatever you've got, as much as you've got, or you die, and your crew dies. That's understood, isn't it? We're test systems here, and you test the systems. Do you want them to live? Then you don't question me. You do it, mister. Do you have that?
It's not reasonable.
I am not a reasonable man. Pori's eyes kept their hold. I never have been. I never take second best. Have you got it, Ensign Dekker? Or are you talk and no show?
He trembled. No human being had ever made him do that, but he shook, and he knew Pori could tell it.
We give you everything you ask for, Dekker. Now you do what you say you can do. You pull the Hellburner out. You do it. Don't give me excuses. I don't hear them. Am I ever going to hear your excuses?
No, sir.
You're meat till you prove otherwise. Prove it, or die. I don't personally care, Dekker.
He couldn't get his breath. He couldn't think. He wanted to strangle Pori so bad. He choked on it. Finally. Yes, sir. I copy that clear. Am I dismissed? Sir? Because you fucking need me, don't you, sir? Pori kept staring at him, looking him up and down,
Said, Aren't you the bitch, Dekker?
and finally made a backhanded move that meant get out. Dismissed. He took it, saluted, turned and walked out, oxygen short, still on an adrenaline burn, and shaking, while he was still remembering Pori from the ship, remembering that Graff had said even then, "Don't get close to him." Then he hadn't been able to figure whether Graff had meant that literally or figuratively, but he had a sinking feeling he'd just made a move that amused Pori, in the sense of defying Pori's expectations. That was an intelligent man, maybe the most intelligent man he'd ever met, maybe too intelligent to mind who lived and who died. He believed what Pori had said. He believed lives didn't matter in there. Lives didn't matter in this station at the moment. Law didn't matter. Guards fell in with him, the same that had brought him there. He hadn't even any notion where they were taking him, but they escorted him to the main corridor and told him to go to barracks. Everybody was confined to barracks. Deserted corridor. Deserted conference rooms. Guards posted line of sight along the curvature. The vacancy of the corridors was surreal. The echoes of his own steps racketed crazily in his ears. The downside of the adrenaline surge left him dizzy and chilled. Another several turns, more empty corridors. Guards at the barracks section door asked for his ID. "Dekker," he said, and pulled his card from his pocket, turned it over numbly, all the rush chilled out of him. "Off duty, just out of detention." The soldier guards said go through. He went, through the corridor into a barracks main room crowded with people he knew, people he liked, guys who grabbed his arm and wished him well. He thought, if you only knew what I've done to you. And almost lost everything when Meg got through the crowd and flung her arms around him. Cheers and catcalls from the company, egging her on for a kiss he didn't shy away from. But all at once he was leaning on Meg, not certain which way was up. Dark was around him, that hazed back to light and the faces. "You all right?" someone asked him, and he tried to say he was. "Guy belongs in bed," somebody else said, but he said no, and they shoved him at a chair and told him the galley was sending food to barracks, and in the meanwhile things had to be better. They were under fleet control. They were trying to straighten out the duty roster and figure out who was on what tomorrow. Meg hauled up a Meg hauled a chair up facing his, grabbed his hands, and made him look at her. "Deck, you tracking share?" "Yeah," he said. He wanted a phone. He didn't know now whether he could cope with the news station or his mother. He kept hearing echoes, like the sim room. Somebody saying, "Enjoy the ride, Dekker." But the voice never had any tone. It drowned in the echoes. He kept seeing the accident sequence on the tape. Not threatening, just a problem. He kept thinking about his mother, the apartment, the dock at R2. He kept seeing mission control and a silent fireball. And the dizzy prospect down the core, all lines gone to a vanishing point. Fire pattern in the sims, intersecting colors, green lines, track and fire points. He shook his head and took account of the room again, guys he ought to love, if he had it left. But maybe he was like Pori. Maybe he didn't have it, or never had. More comfortable not to have it. More comfortable to love patterns more than people. Patterns didn't die. They just evaporated. People went with so much more violence. God, he's spaced. Get him on his feet. We're gonna fly with this moonbeam? Arm came around him, hauled him for his feet, and he didn't resist it. I tell you, I should have been in Stockholm. Should have got my transfer. I hate this shit. Friends here. People he trusted. People he'd betrayed in there with Pori, because he'd been a damn fool. Man's got to eat. Somebody ought to call the meds. Somebody ought to call the meds. No meds. He'd had enough. He walked. He got to his room. He hit the bed. "Didn't search the room," he thought he heard Meg say. "Didn't mess up the drawers, I mean. These MPs are politer than company cops." "Pudette, they're just neater," Sal said. And Ben, "There wasn't a search." "How do you?" Sal started to ask. "How do you?" Sal started to ask, and said, "Silly question. Très dim of me." Which means... It means whatever it means. Electronics and flash scan assured privacy, even against fiber and remotes. Security swore so. Graff could feel secure in this cubbyhole next to the carrier's bridge, if he could trust present company. Ask Dema and Saito who they belonged to? They'd say, Captain Q. Of course. Saito would say it without a flicker. One preferred to hope and reason that was the case, rather than ask a pointless question. "Tanzen," Saito said, apropos of the situation within the station, "but it came back negative out of Geneva. That means the UDC wants him where he is, which could be show of opposition. They could replace him 3 days from now. Or they want him where he is because he knows where the records are and what's in them, which could be useful to them here. They lost a big one. Forces inside the JLC lost a big one." "We didn't know," Dema put in, doubtless reading minds, "when it would shift. That it might, one hoped." He considered a question, shot a sidelong glance at Demas, and asked point blank, "And Pori, where does he fit?" Dema broke eye contact, just momentarily. Saito's face was absolutely informationless. Saito said then, "Pori is highly successful." At what?
Anger betrayed him into that bluntness. Anger and the memory of dealing with them differently. At covering his trail, evidently. If they were Pories, or about to be, he was laying a fire track in his own path. He knew he was, but he had his personal limit of tolerance. And he disturbed them. Even Saito flinched, looked down, saying,
Some things are excused as long as the results are evident. Some patterns of behavior simply do not come through in social context.
Other things, Demas said with unexpected harshness, are blindly ignored. The captain is head of strategic operations. The captain is too valuable to assign back to Hellburner, so says the EC. Pori is available. He could be prompted into qualification. That is what happened, JG. Plain and simple. He looked at Demas, saw fire flags left and right of this conversation, and knew he could self-destruct here. He took a chance on them. A last chance. Who wanted him? Who? Promoted him? Who does promote by executive order these days? Mazian, who wasn't the best of militia captains. Q was, or Kreshov, maybe. But Mazian was the promoter. Mazian was the one who could smile his way through corporate and legislative doorways. Mazian could say things the way they needed to be said.
The Earth Company, Saito said, has Solcorp, Lunacorp, Aztecs, all space-based entities. But it also has its hands deep into the whole Eurotrust industrial complex. Bauer Kraftwerk, Statentech, the list is extensive, that have very good reasons to want extension of their facilities outside the reach of pressure groups and watch committees, meaning into space. Those Earth-based companies give the EC an enormous influence inside the Joint Legislative Committee. The citizen pressure groups are enormously naive, usually single issue. They think they move events. But in general, the JLC is riddled with influence trading, purchase decisions made on relationships, not quality.
Ancient terrestrial life form, Demas said. Dinosaur. Vast body. Little brain. It flourished on an age of abundant food supply. I've heard the word, Graff said.
Not to overwhelm you with local history, Saito said, but the UDC is a composite creature that never did function well. The Earth Company created us to oppose Cyteen's secession, but it never imagined a splinter colony could raise a population base of Union size, and it never imagined the light barrier would fall so quickly.
Nor, Demas said, he didn't understand the shipbuilding capacity of an enemy with no social debt. Ships cost Union nothing but sunlight, ultimately. Do you want more facilities? Create more workers.
But now the EC understands, Saito said, at least enough to frighten them. The special interests understand enough to see their interests are threatened. Now everybody wants to manage the crisis. Everybody wants to safeguard their power base. Everybody believes there's fault, but it's most certainly someone else's. The free traders are making headway.
Union-run merchanders, Graff muttered. Long we'd last. And they'd be nothing to Union but a supply source. Cytene manage Earth? There'd be short patience.
Possibly they'd founder of bewilderment. But that is the truth, JG. The company brought us here because Earth doesn't believe in star travelers unless it sees us, and its own problems absorb its attention. The EC needed the demonstrable presence, the face and the voice to make the outside real to these people. And whether they've believed their own myth, or simply view Mazian as manageable, he's gotten far more important than we planned.
He was listening to sedition, to conspiracy. The captains had sent Mazian down-world. They'd chosen their spokesman, who excelled mostly at salving over wounded egos, at getting the captains to make unified decisions. It was merchanter command structure. Mazian was only the fleet's COM-1. They're putting him in single command, Demas said. God, he didn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. But Demas went on. The EC stamps his personal choices as a matter of course. Yes, he does the things that have to be done,
but he's not following the rules we laid down. Hellburner has all but foundered, Saito said, on citizen groups that fear the EC, who've insisted the UDC do what it doesn't have the personnel to do. They've run us out of time, Demas said. So now the EC steps in and gets us the power to do something. But it's Mazians they give it to. The captain's still sitting at Sol 1 with a mess on his hands. The whole UDC administrative system suddenly shoved inside our operations, but we begged him, Saito said, to break with Mazian, to repudiate his personnel assignments, catch the commercial back here, and take command of the carrier. The hell with Mazian's reputation at the EC. With the EC. His heart was beating faster and faster. He was sure what he was hearing, and surmised what it must have been passing. God on Fleetcom. But the captains won't do it, Demas said. Won't expose dissent among the captains. Not now, he says, with Earth, appearances and public belief are everything. If we don't get the riders and the rest of the carriers funded in this legislative session, we're back to the spooks and the rim runners. He was still reeling from the first shock. Nerves wanted to hype, and he tried to hold it. What in hell did the captain want me to do here? Was I supposed to foul it up so badly he'd have to take it over? Or is Pori what I want us? That rump session of the committee wasn't supposed to come here, Saito said. You handled it as well as it could have been handled. You were sincere. You were indignant. You were the epitome of the fleet's integrity and professionalism. You didn't know anything to the contrary. So now we've got Mazian's hand-picked command here. Mazian's put Edmund Pori over a program that's already self-destructing. Have you worked with this man? I have. I was in the belt with him. We are extremely concerned, Demas said. We are concerned about those carriers out in the belt and at Mars. They have yet to have officers assigned. Yes, they'll bring in our people, but 15 of the captains will be UDC. That was the deal that was cut. His stomach turned over. A second time. You're serious? That is the deal. 15 of the carriers, with Earthborn command. Who do they have? Saito made a ripple of her fingers. They'll have a selection process. Earth believes in processes. That's 15 dead ships. First time they take them past Viking. JG, this is the crash course on truth in this venue. Mazian projects well. As a strategist, he's even competent. But thank God for the Qs and the Kreshovs. They'll keep us alive. They may even keep Mazian alive. I've got a kid on the verge of insanity, he was about to protest, when he recalled he didn't have anything. He didn't have a command, so far as he knew. Dekker's not going to work well with Pori. Dekker's the best we've got. Mitch is not going to work well with Pori. He's the next. We're going to lose this program. No, we're not, Demas said. Pori's in command of the program. Pori's put you in charge of personnel. Me? Where did you hear this? Say it went through channels. Did he do the picking? Or was my selection compromise? Compromise. Though in Mazian's view, I think you're to keep us in line, Saito said. Technically, we equal his rank, but we're not command personnel. We're not designated as such by the captain. Consequently, the captain can recall us at will, and Pori can't take us under his command, or get us assigned to that carrier. I'm afraid that isn't your case. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's a typo, I think. Yes, that is an end quote. And then it starts a new quote, and then it says Saito again. Okay, so I think the last one was Dema, so I'm going to reread that bit. Give me a sec. I think this is the only real major name typo I've seen in any of her books, come to think of it, that I can remember off the top of my head. Did he do the picking, or was my selection compromise? Though in Mazian's view, I think you ought to keep us in line, Demas said. Technically, we equal his rank, but we're not command personnel. We're not designated as such by the captain. Consequently, the captain can recall us at will, and Pori can't take us under his command, or get us assigned to that carrier. I'm afraid that isn't your case. We're concerned for that, Saito said, but there's nothing we can do but advise where our perspective is of use.
He was glad he'd not had time for supper. He thought he might lose it, if that were the case.
All personnel? All flight and technical associated with the program. Tanzer's still there, of course, but he's promoted sideways, still in charge of R&D, but Hellburner's being lifted out of R&D. Into what? Fleet ops. The parts manufacturers and the yards are being given a go-ahead on a promise of funds tied to test success. They're pushing this ship for production. We're funded for one carrier's full complement, but no further. And the plain fact is, we're out of time. Latest projection is, we're going to see the first carrier rider system in the field in 6-7 months. Theirs or ours. Naturally, we have our preference. What in hell are they asking me to do with these people? Mazian sets the priorities. Pori carries them out. You keep the crews sane.
You mean I promised them anything? Have I got a shred of authority to carry it out? For the second time, Demas evaded eye contact.
I'd say it's more than we can do, but no, in effect, you don't.
Graff getting the shaft. But wait, there's more.
Is he asleep? Ben asked quietly, made a trip to the bathroom while Sal was drowsing, and stopped for a look-see. Dekker looked scuzzed, thoroughly, face down in the pillows. Meg was using his reader, scanning through Dekker's manuals. There was a lot of study going on in the barracks, over cold dead hamburgers and breaded fish. The smell out there could gag you. And the atmosphere was crazed. Guys glad they were going to fly this thing. The pilots and the lunatic lead techs who made up the core crew. He should have counted, he told himself. He'd been a numbers man. He should have added it. And panicked when the number of him and Dekker and Meg and Sal tallied 4, same as the other core crew units out there. He's out, Meg said. Cold. Thank God. Man seriously needing his sleep. He came and sank down on the edge of the other bunk, said, ever so quietly, "You like this guy?" Meg shrugged. You never got unequivocal out of her or Sal. But she was here. She'd risked her neck and her license for him. Partner, yeah. But Meg didn't do things for one reason, or even two. A solid part of it was in that data card, was in the way Meg looked right now, sharp and serious and on as he'd ever seen her. He didn't say what he'd sat down to say. Flunk that damn test. He slid a glance at Dekker and back and said, "You know, you better carry a pocket wrench." Any belter knew what a wrench was for on Helldeck. Meg's mouth quirked. "The CO's crazy." "The CO's crazy," he said very quietly. "I flew out here with the guy." "So did we." "That where they got him? Belt Garrison?" She shook her head, whispered, "That carrier came in from deep. We don't know where. All the time we were on there, we saw crew, but never once saw him." "What did you think?" Meg frowned. "Didn't like the signals." He said, under his breath, "We got a serious warning. Don't know what that guy's problem is, but it is. We got him far more than once, just watching us. The body language. He wants his space, he wants yours. Smiles and laughs, but he doesn't smile, you know what I mean? He watched Deck real close. Deck didn't like him." "Grounds?" "Just that." He didn't think the place was bugged. Events hadn't proven it, and it was too egocentric to think Pori's security had made a straight line to their quarters. But he got uneasy with the topic. He said, "Hell-deck radar, maybe. Guys you'd insist do the EVA if it was the two of you in a miner can, you know what I mean?" Meg got real dead grim. Ask Sal about that, and then bit her lip like she'd said too much of Sal's business. "Yeah, same signals. You have a ship with Sammy Wynn?" Awful thought. Guy with some serious personality faults that wouldn't get better on a long, lonely haul. "I wouldn't share a bar table with Sammy Wynn. Whatever happened to him?" "Spaced by now, I hope. Spaced by now, I hope." She stopped and looked aside as Dekker turned over and buried his head in a pillow. Time to go, Ben decided, before they woke Ensign Moonbeam. He stood up, stood still till he knew Dekker wasn't going to wake up. "You going to take the aptitudes?" Meg asked him. Sore spot, that. "Yeah," he admitted, and went back to the room with Sal. He had signed the assignment roster out there. He hadn't intended to tell them. But what had happened here, with the UDC CO busted out of command, himself being caught behind a fleet security wall, he didn't give a real thought to transfer right now. He could test into something administrative. Damn sure the fleet wouldn't want him going back under the UDC curtain with what he'd witnessed here, if by any means they could finagle hanging on to him. And it certainly looked as if they had the clout. He didn't have the instincts or the nerves for combat. He'd proved that before, and that was bound to show. Drugged you down, they did, even for the basic test. Hooked you up to a machine and read your responses and your answers. You couldn't fake this one, they said. He passed the door back into his room, sat down on the bed carefully so as not to wake Sal. Low light, scatter of braids on the pillows, innocent as a babe profile with parted lips, slight snub nose. Damn it, the conniving kid was his partner. He liked being with her. He'd found a piece of himself clicked back into place when she'd come walking into the barracks. And being without her again was a dreary thought. He earnestly, honestly liked Sal. And Meg, which he'd never said about anybody but Maury Bird. And God help him, he could even get acclimated to Dekker, or just plain nerve dead. Fact was, scuzz as this whole place was, somehow the echo and the racket and the coming and going in the barracks fit him like an old sock. Fact was, he liked the racket and the activity and the accent he'd grown up with echoing off the bulkheads. Pressure here was from fools higher up, different than TI's carpeted, high-voltage corridors, where competition was cutthroat and constant. But this wasn't any damn mining run this group was prepping for. At TI, your highest chance of fatal injury was sticking your finger in a power socket or ODing on caffeine. Here, God, they weren't even sure the damn ship would work. Rumor out in the hall was that they were going max V with the program, and they still hadn't proved any crew could run it once, let alone fly it in combat. That was crazy. And he wasn't, even if insanity got the rest of them. Sal go out there and turn herself into a missile? Sal and Meg end up in a fireball? Hell if he could stop it. But he didn't know how to. Couldn't stop Meg, damn the woman, if Dekker couldn't. And if Meg went, Sal went. And if Sal went... Oh, hell, he was not a fool. There were women in Stockholm. There'd be a way to get down there, even through Fleet Command, if he just got aptituded into strategic technical. Stockholm women wouldn't ask stupid questions like, "What's the belt?" They'd have university degrees and stand and watch the tide come in and the snow fall and think it was all damned ordinary. Hell. Bloody hell with women. Dekker was saner. At least Dekker knew what he wanted.
Chapter 10.
Insert card, please, the neutral voice said. The phone clicked. Dekker held the receiver and waited. And waited. Meg and Ben and Sal were in testing. His day didn't start until 10:15, when he had an appointment with evaluations, which meant he could go to the gym or try to settle his breakfast and his nerves. Or try a phone call, see if he could get a personal call through to Sol 1 on FleetCom, in spite of the security crackdown.
Ensign Dekker,
Human voice this time.
is this an official call?
I'm trying to call my mother. He hated to sound like a strayed 6-year-old. Mother always felt strange to him. Mama he'd long outgrown, although it came naturally to Belter ears. It's a next of. There was something in the news. Look, can you put me through to Lieutenant Graff? He knows the situation.
I'm not being obstructionist, Ensign Dekker. I'm aware of your situation, but I am required to get an authorization for personal calls.
God, everyone in the solar system knew his business. Yeah, well, can you do anything, Fleetcom? The lieutenant's not outstanding easy to find this morning.
I'll page him.
Everybody's paged him, Dekker muttered. I'll card in every little bit. I'm going down to Gym 3A.
I'm sorry. The gym is now off limits to fleet personnel. Do the one on 3 deck, Section 2.
How do I get my clothes out of the locker in 1A?
Check with the office on 3 deck.
Everything was on its ear. Thanks, he said glumly, and went 4 sections and took a lift in. It was about as much exercise as he wanted, just walking it. But one thing he'd learned in his tour in the belt, if you could crawl to the gym, you crawled there and worked out. And if you got the spooks or the nerves, you went there and burned the chill off. You didn't let your mind go in loops. Never let that start, not when you worked in cold, dark places with things that went bang all too commonly. The office there had his gym clothes, everything in sacks with old locker numbers. They had his name on the gym records. They had lockers already assigned to him and his crew. He hadn't had a run of things that worked in weeks. It gave him a moment of ridiculous cheerfulness. He had the whole gym to himself for the hour, everybody else being in sims or in special briefings. He wasn't fondly looking forward to his own session with the meds upcoming. Warm up the sore spots and go in there with the adrenaline burned out of him, was the plan. Lunch on carbohydrates and go into evaluation at 1300, warmed up and hyped, and blow hell out of their damned tests. He could do it. The doctors had kept him flat on his back too long. He'd dropped 5 kilos on the hospital food, and Custard Charlie Tyson had gotten a couple of good hits in, but he could do it if he could get the chill out of his bones. Light workout with the hand weights raised a sweat. Coordination was shot. That wasn't good. He leaned on his knees a moment, tried to get his wind back and the rubbery feeling out of his arms, getting madder and madder at the meds, at the UDC, at the fleet that had busted Graff over to a desk job and put in a bastard with an attitude. Temper wasn't helpful. Dema would say that. Calm down, Dekker. Use your head. Adrenaline's for speed, not stomach acid. Yeah. But it didn't help when the knees wanted to cave in, when you had serious worries about 3 fools who'd gotten themselves into a situation for his sake, and had a CO who'd flat warned him he didn't give a damn for their survival. Stomach acid, hell! He wanted to beat the shit out of Pori. That was why he was shivering. And if he did that, with all the esoteric consequences of people he knew and didn't know, it wouldn't stop bastards from being bastards, and wouldn't get Pori out of there. He'd only make it worse. He didn't want to be in this situation. He didn't want to be anybody anyone else relied on for anything. He was skits as hell. He was crazy. Ben knew it. He didn't see why Fleet Command couldn't see it. He didn't know why he'd never been made an issue, or he didn't know why he'd ever been made an issue, or put where they'd put him. Except the shepherds had needed somebody crazier than they were except the shepherds had needed somebody crazier than they were to press their differences with the insystemers. And people who wouldn't have given a damn about him back in the belt found a use for him here. He wasn't Paul Dekker to them. He was this to one group and that to another, and nobody really knew shit about him. "Hi, Deck. Good to see you, Deck. How you doing?" He couldn't stand it anymore. Because Ben was right. They didn't know him. Didn't know he was a screw-up, a damn dumb pusher jock who didn't think before he opened his mouth. Only value he had to anyone, the fact that his nerves jumped faster than average. Only thing he was good at, that ship. That was all that had mattered to him. Pete and Ellie and Falcone had had themselves, and they'd gone together. The fleet had thrown them together. They'd tested high, that was all. And they were good, and they'd worked together, but he was burned out this morning. He didn't even know whether he'd ever felt anything with them but comfort, and that was cheap. But he didn't know why Ben had decided to take the damn test this morning. Ben had scuzzed out on him. If Ben had held out, Ben might have persuaded Sal, and Sal might have reasoned with Meg. Like hell. He hadn't seduced Meg out here. At least Meg and Sal weren't his fault. The ship had done that. Some lying bastard in the fleet had done that, who'd told Meg they'd give her a chance. Yeah, a chance. Thanks. Drug made you seriously spaced. You had sensor spots patched all over you, in places that made a body most emphatically wonder if it was procedure or the fem tech having a few loose circuits of her own. "Do it where?" she remembered asking. Oh, wait. I think that's Meg. "Do it where?" she remembered asking. But the examiner, that was a guy, nice-looking gray-headed man, asked her to match up all these shapes and holes. God, she hadn't done this one in years. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I don't fly little cubes." Neither did he said. At least he had a sense of humor. So she ran the test, and she tracked on discrimination stuff that flashed on screens. They moved her to another station and belted her in, and the computer spun her around and around. Easy piece, nothing hard at all. Till the floor dropped out from under her, and then the thing went through its paces. Wanted you to draw a straight line? Right. Wanted you to get up and walk one? Yeah, maybe. Sit in the spin chair again. Wait for the lights and press the button while the chair spins? Siren blast, right before the light flash. Dirty trick, sumbitch. Dirty trick. Flash again. Flash, flash. Pause. Flash. Hold the yoke and the toggles. Make the VR lines meet? This was a good one. Hadn't done this one before. Weight escaped his balance and bounced. Dekker ended up on one knee, caught a breath, and waited for the room to stop spinning before he went to pick it up and rack it and lock it in. Good show he was going to make for the meds in an hour. He drew long breaths, sat down, and felt after the towel to mop his face. Stars came out of a vast dark. Lights on the panel glowed with information. It was in his head, the same as, in the belt, you got to seeing rocks in your sleep. Not rocks as they existed in the deep dark, but the way they were in the charts, the courses they ran, falling sunward, faster and faster, and then more and more slowly outward. He wiped the sweat that stung his eyes. He heard somebody come in, challenged at the office for numbers and names. "Yeah," he heard someone say, far away, and a door shut. Echo. Door opening and closing. He'd seen a shape. He'd talked to someone. But he couldn't remember to whom. He chased the memory. But the voice that came back lacked all tone. Just checking. do what you were doing. Who in hell would he take that answer from? Piece of nonsense. He could screw this test. They wanted him to discriminate a damn lot of advancing lines and dots? Easier if the sensors didn't itch. He muttered, "Quick way to solve this. Who programmed this?" Examiner said, "Don't talk. This is a piece of shit, Major. Beggin' pardon." Zap. "Fucking arms comp. I'm not testing for this." Zap. "You're not damn bad, Lieutenant, but you're not real modest either. I'm damned good, but I'm not killing things. You have a moral objection?" He put hands and eyes on autopilot and left them to search for screen-generated threats. At definable intervals. Random number generator in the virtuals, for God's sake. "I got a moral objection. I got a moral objection to getting shot at." Exactly what we're looking for. He thought about that reasoning. He thought about screwing the test while he was zapping stupid dots. Faster now. Screw it. You severely got a pattern in here. I've been telling them that. Tell you something. Zap. I'm supposed to be in Stockholm. Somebody scuzzed my records. Zap. Match me up with the lunatic. Zap. Zap, zap, zap. Oh, hell. See? Not all a pattern. You missed that one. Getting cocky, were you? Faster now. Son of a bitch, he said. You have 2 hands, 2 key sets. Brain can do both operations. Hands can. How good are you? "Damn moonbeam partner of mine," he muttered. "You give me programming. I'm telling you, anywhere else is a waste. Zap. I don't want combat. I know what this mother's doing. Zap, zap, zap." Hand on the other pad. Interrupt to command level and invoke the Chaos OI off the internal generators. Obsolete as a security device, but certainly an improvement on this antique. Resume. Let them figure that one. Let their techs come in and patch it if they didn't like it. "Where did you get that code?" "Telepathy," he said. "Sir, I told you. I belong in Stockholm." Watch the lights. Track the dot. Do you have any blurring of vision, Mr. Dekker? Have you had any headaches? Stand here. Stand there. Look at the light. Bend over, Mr. Dekker. He escaped with a grudging release on his card and an admonition to take his mineral supplements. Got to a phone outside the med station and put the card in to check the readout for messages. Lunch, he thought, might bring people to check their messages. Might get a phone call, however muzzy, from Meg, telling him how he was doing, how she was doing. Ugh. None from Graff, none from Meg or Ben or Sal. No authorizations. Just a reminder of his appointment in evaluations. And a note from the gym that he hadn't carded in his whoops. And a note from the gym that he hadn't carded in his preferred time slot, and was he interested in team volleyball? Hell. Marine guards at every intersection. Corridors everywhere had a decided chill. God, there were even guards in the mess hall. He started in, saw Mitch and Paulie and the guys at the tables, and they saw him. Upset him. He couldn't say why. He walked by for politeness' sake. "Sit down," they said, offering him a chair. But he couldn't face lunch of a sudden, in this place. Too many faces in the room, too many people trying to be friendly, who didn't know all that was going on with him, and the guards and the UDC watching him from the other end of the room. He muttered, "No, I'm on medicals right now. Just time for a soft drink, thanks." "Got anything back on the tests?" Wasn't a thing stirred in C barracks but what everybody was in it. Wait, what? Yes, I did read that correctly. Wasn't a thing stirred in C barracks but what everybody was in it. No, not yet. He patted the back of Mitch's chair and made his escape to the rec area foyer, where he could card a soft drink and a granola bar that tasted like cardboard and hit his stomach like lead. They probably were talking about him back there, and he couldn't talk to them, couldn't deal with them unless he knew until bleh, couldn't deal with them until he knew what he was, whether he was going to clear the tests himself, whether his partners were passing theirs. He wasn't anyone until he knew who he was working with, what he was, where he'd be, what they'd assign him to. Fly again, yeah. Pori would see to that. Front of the lineup. Or the bottom, at Pori's discretion. He'd opened his damned mouth. He'd forgotten for a critical second he had partners who could be in danger from what he did or promised. Couple of UDC guys came over and carded a candy bar. Names were Price and McCain. Tex. They hardly even looked at him, but he was sweating. He kept thinking, if I'd kept my mouth shut, if I'd done what the colonel wanted, if I'd only once ducked my head and played the game. Tray banged somewhere. The room felt cold. His mother had said, "Paul, what is it with you? Why do you always end up in the middle of it?" He wished to God he knew that. He wished to God he could go over there with the other guys and sit down and be what they wanted him to be, but he couldn't even tell them what he'd done or what he was waiting to find out. Please God, they'd aptitude somewhere down the list, somewhere out of immediate usefulness, and he could go maybe to Chad's crew, patch things up with them. He couldn't think of a matchup else. He couldn't think of a matchup else he could make that, Okay, no, I was right the first time, sort of. Please God, they'd aptitude somewhere down the list, somewhere out of immediate usefulness, and he could go maybe to Chad's crew, patch things up with them. He couldn't think of a matchup else he could make that might make a wow. He couldn't think of a matchup else he could make that else he could make. He couldn't think of a matchup else he could make that might have a chance. There we go. Now we have the meter. Now we have the rhythm. Now we've got the movement. He couldn't think of a matchup else he could make that might have a chance. He should have offered that up to Pori. Pori wasn't crazy. He didn't want to lose another ship, for God's sake. Pori probably would have called it a good idea. Good for morale. Pull the program together. UDC and fleet. He should still propose that to Pori. Talk to Chad's guys himself in advance, if he could get them to talk to him. God, why couldn't he think about people? He was all right with machines, all right with anything that reacted in just one way when you touched it. He could understand that. He just couldn't figure how to stop himself before he said things. When he opened his mouth, it was wrong. When he didn't say anything, it was wrong. He never got it figured out. Some people just understood him, and most didn't, and the ones that did were always in trouble because of the ones that didn't. Some of his life, that. Evaluations said he was smart, so why couldn't he get that right? Like, go in there and apologize to Pori and take what he had coming. Because when he walked up against a guy like that, something went snap inside. He went hyper, and he couldn't think. That was the whole damn problem. So calm down. Don't do that? Why is there a question mark there? Don't do that? So calm down? Don't do that? It was why the fleet had recruited him. It was what they trained him to do. Split second, hyped and half crazy, and they wouldn't understand he didn't come with an off switch. Except maybe Graff understood. But Graff wasn't answering pages today. Damn him. A little hyped. They said, "You can relax now." But there wasn't any sleep. Just the boards, alive with lights. Hands knew where to go and went there. Hell of a way to teach. But they said, "This is a sim tape. Familiarization. It won't prioritize for you. Just give you the handedness of the boards." "Got it. Yeah. No trouble." "Don't fight the sims, Katie. You don't want you want to bring that pulse down." Yeah, I'm not fighting it. Happy as hell. God, I want this thing. Don't want to screw it up. God, I don't want to screw it. Calm. Yeah, yeah. So don't get excited, Katie. Don't go after it. Ride with it. Just float and enjoy it. Lot better. Katie, how you doing? She laughed like an idiot. You all right there? You know what you're doing? Her hands were reaching. She wasn't doing it. But she didn't object. The sequence made complete sense. Yawol, mate. Yawol, mate. Piece of easy there. Clumsy direction, then. Her hand shook. Shit. Boards went dark. Direction stopped. She grabbed for the B panel in the fuse conditions, and the examiner said, Abort, abort if it's all right. Abort, it's all right. What did I do? Her heart was going half light. The drug made her lightheaded, and she hated the sensation. Tape error, not yours. Relax. Made her mad. They had no right to screw up. But you didn't get mad while you were at the boards. You paid attention. All attention. Save mad for later. Miss Cady. New voice. That was a system abort. Don't worry about it. You can stand down. Thank you. Cold and calm. Same as you did when something went seriously wrong. She flipped the board standby switch. Habit. Fool, she thought. It was a toy board anyway. Thank you. Another delay. You can get up. Go to the room with the red light showing. You are in .9 gravity. I think I can remember that, she muttered. Some don't. Thanks. Anger was the immediate reaction. She was embarrassed to beg, but, putting her foot off the platform, Do I get another try on that abort? A hesitation. Somebody had blanked a mic. Then, How are you feeling? Good enough for another try. Self-disgust. If I can get one. Get back in the chair, then. Thank God. She was all but shaking, and damped that down. Fast. Pulse is up, Miss Cady. Yeah, restart. Hyped as hell, came a mutter from the earplug. Faint. Then at normal volume. The yoke is an automated assist. It is changing its responses. Do you perceive that? Yeah. Absolute relief. They hadn't told her the sim could do that. But I got my own numbers. Let's shorten this. What are you, IMAT? IMAT or CSET. A or B, select your format, input your actual license level. No problem. She took B, ran her numbers in, hoping she remembered them, hoping she was still that sharp, and watched the readout for response profiles. Shit! Excuse. 12.489 sudden Gs on a tenth of the yoke range. She cut it back, recalced in her head, thinking she could have a seriously pissed examiner if she dithered too long. But damn it, she needed the fine control on that hairline correction in the Sims, and you had to have it wide enough if they threw you in emergency. Hell of a thrust this Sim was set for, different than shuttle controls by a long way. Forgot to ask if time counted. Too late to spare a neuron. You did it right, that was all. You did it real. Hell with them. Set the controls to your own touch, and take the time it took. They should have effing said if there were criticalities not on the instruments. It was a new kind of adaptive assist. Piece of nice, this was. All kinds of interlocks and analyses it could give you. Mining in the belt, you adapted your jerry-built and most egregiously not AI ship by whittling a new part out of plastic. And what you saw on your boards was a whole lot of hard-to-read instruments, not an integrated 360-degree V-HUD with the course plot and attitudes marked in glowing lines. This thing was trying to find out your preferences, arguing with you when its preconceptions thought it knew you. But it would listen. Damn it, machine, Soyuz deuce, don't get cheek with me. Used one of these things 10+ years ago, she had, but God, that had been an antique against this piece. All right, she calmed her breathing rate. Panel lights lit. Scopes lit. Go! Numbers hemorrhaged. God!
Oh shit, I haven't been muted for the last minute, have I? If anybody's out there, please tell me if I've been muted the last minute, because I think I flicked my mute switch and it turned off.
I might have screwed up. I might have screwed up. Anybody? Anybody at all? I really hope not. Okay, we're gonna proceed as if I haven't blanked out a chunk there with Meg Katie in the pilot seat. Well, in the test. Nothing yet? Dekker asked the desk on his mid-test break, and the secretary in testing said, "No, sir, no result yet." "Are they out? Have they left?" "I don't think so, sir." He tried fleet comm. He had a new comm tech and had to explain everything again. "I just want to know if the lieutenant's ever checked in."
He's in a meeting.
Fleetcom said. "Has he gotten his messages?"
I think he has. Excuse me.
On hold again, when all he wanted to do was hang up, and he didn't want to offend Fleetcom by doing that before the tech got back to him. He wished he hadn't called. 5-minute break from his own evaluations, it was 14:56 by the clock. The granola bar and soft drink were wearing extremely thin, and he was regretting it. If he could get off the phone, he could get down the hall to the vending machines. No word on his partners. Aptitudes was a 4-hour session. You could take a little longer coming out from under the trank if you reacted. God, he didn't know what to...
Ensign Dekker, sorry to keep you waiting. I did get hold of the lieutenant. He says see him in his office at 1400. That's 21A, admin.
I'm in evaluations till 1700. I'm in the middle of tests.
Excuse me.
Hell. He put a hand over his eyes. He leaned against the counter and waited. Looking pleadingly at the secretary across the desk, then, "Do they ever take this long on aptitudes?" I don't know, sir. I've only worked here for 4...
Ensign Dekker, I'm sorry. The lieutenant says he can't talk at 1700. He's got another meeting.
Will he clear a phone call for me to 1? That's all I want.
I think he wants to talk to you about that.
Shit. Look. He shut out the light and the secretary's presence with the palm of his hand, tried to think. But he kept seeing fireballs, hearing that door clank. Is that all he wants? The phone call? Or does he want... Look, can I talk to him online? 2 minutes.
He's in a meeting, sir. Just a moment.
He was late by now, by 2 minutes. You weren't late in evaluations. You didn't antagonize the examiners, who are UDC to begin with.
The lieutenant says he needs to talk to you. He says at 2200.
2200. Graff didn't plan to sleep, maybe. Right. Thanks. Yeah, I'll be there. My partners aren't out of test yet, Dekker said. They went in at 600. Oh, 600. It's 2202, and testing doesn't answer questions. They're all right, Graff said, quietly, from the other side of the desk. I can tell you that much. So what do you know? That they're being very thorough. They're not reacting to the drug or anything. No, they're all right. I did check. It wasn't regulation. He wasn't convinced. He wasn't at all convinced. Graff said, "On the other matter, I just want to call my mother, make sure she's all right." He kept his frustration to himself. He didn't want to push Graff. He was running short of friendlies in admin. Graff said, "I got your message. I understand. There's a good possibility her phone calls are being monitored by the police, possibly by someone less official." "Who?" "All we know," Graff said, "is the same thing you saw in the news. We're investigating. I could wish this lawyer weren't involved, personally. Is your mother a member, a contributor of that organization? I don't know. I don't think so. Are you asking me her politics? You don't have to answer that. She hasn't got any politics that I know of. She didn't when I lived there. I don't think she would change. She was never politically active, never expressed any opinions for or against the government or the Earth Company. Bit by bit, the line of questioning made him uneasy. It wasn't like Graff, at least as he knew Graff, to probe after private information. He didn't think it was necessarily Graff's idea, and that meant whoever was investigating. So he offered a bit of his own reasons. I was Rab when I was a kid. The clothes, the haircut. Katie says I was a stupid plastic, and I guess I was. But I thought I was real. I used the words. My mother got hot about it. Said politics was all the same. Didn't matter what party. All crooked. She didn't want any part of it. Told me I was a fool for getting involved. They'd shot these people down on Earth. I think Meg was there, he almost said. But that was more than Graff needed to hear. If a deep spacer cared about the company, the Earthers trying to emigrate. Think what? Graff asked. He couldn't remember this thread for a moment. He couldn't remember his thread for a moment. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. She's just not the kind. Works a full shift mostly over. If you want extras, if you want extras, you have to do that. And that was all she wanted. A nice place. Maybe a station there. Security. That kind of thing. You wouldn't get her involved in anything. You know the Civil bleh. You know the Civil Liberty Association? No, sir. I never heard of them. They're the ones funding your mother's lawyer. They're headquartered in Munich. They support lawsuits and certain causes. That's mostly what they do. Their board of advisors has some of the same associations as the Sun Party, the Peace Front, the Carl Leiden Foundation, the Party of Man. He shook his head. I don't know anything about them. I doubt she does. They're Earth-based internationals of several related groups. Only the Civil Liberty Association and the Human Research Foundation maintain offices off-Earth. They apparently do each other's business, so I understand. I'm no expert in terrestrial affairs, but I thought you should know this organization does have political overtones that aren't friendly to the program or to the fleet. What do you want me to do? I only thought you should be aware of the situation. Deeper and deeper. He thought of saying, I'm in no position to restrain her from anything. I can't do your politics for you. But it was all on their side and nothing on hers. And probably the lieutenant didn't want a blunt question, but it wouldn't be his first offense this week. So, hasn't the fleet got strings it might pull? Possibly. So, what do you want me to say to her? Nothing. Nothing on that score. I just want you to be aware of these things. Why? In case of what, for God's sake? Do you still want to call her? Graff shifted a glance toward the phone on his desk. He had never believed of himself that he was smart, no matter what evaluations told him. If he was smart, he wouldn't be here now, put on the spot to make an excruciatingly personal phone call in front of a man he'd thought he trusted, whose motives he didn't now entirely understand. And God, he didn't want to talk to her. He was fast losing his nerve. Do you want to do that? Yes, sir, he said, before all of it evaporated. If you can get me through. Graff took up the handset and punched in. Fleetcom, route this through our system. FSO, Sol 1. Number there? 97 2849. Dekker, Ingrid. Routing can find her. 22:10 main day, and she ought to be home. She didn't have a nightlife. At least she hadn't had when he'd been living at home. Takes a bit, Graff said, and gave him the handset. It's going through now. He held it to his ear, listened to the clicks and the tones. His heart was beating fast. What in hell was he going to say? Hello, mother? Click, click, click. Beep. There's a noise on the line. A beep? He nodded. Somebody's got it monitored. Fleetcom's picking that up. Hell, it was going through. He listened for the pickup, but the answering service came on instead.
Miss Dekker is out at the moment. Kindly leave your name and number.
You'd know. Mother, this is Paul. I'm sorry to hear about the trouble you're having. It was hard to talk coherently to a machine, hard to think with that steady beep that meant the police or somebody else was listening. I don't know if I can help, but if you want to talk, I'm here. If you just want to talk, I'm here. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to help. He wondered if he should mention money. But while he was thinking, it clicked off and connections broke, all the way back along the route, leaving him the sound of static. She wasn't home, he said, and gave the handset back. I left a message on the machine. Anything that comes through, you will get. I promise you. Thank you. They'd taught him to say thank you. Please. Yes, sir. No, sir. Stand straight. Answer what you're asked. They'd told him he wouldn't fly if he didn't. His mother hadn't had that advantage in dealing with him. He didn't remember he'd ever said, yes, ma'am, or please, or whatever boys were supposed to answer to their mothers. Fuck you, he'd said once. In a fit of temper, the week she'd bailed him out of juvenile court, and she'd slapped his face. He'd not hit her. Thank God. He'd held it back. He hadn't hit her. Only respect he'd ever shown her that last year. And if they shipped him out from here, the only respect he might ever have a chance to show, except that phone call. Forgive me, the lieutenant said. I have to ask this. In your judgment, is it possible, is it remotely possible she did make threats against Marscorp? Ingrid Dekker wasn't a walkover. She wasn't going to stand and take it, not without handing it back. If they threatened her, but she wouldn't just take it into her head to do that. No, I don't believe that. I have to ask this. At whose orders, sir? Are you close to your mother? Still? God, he didn't want to discuss it. But the lieutenant had been on his side. Graff, if anybody, was still his lifeline. He didn't want to put his mother in a bad light. She was the one in trouble, and she needed all the credit she could get. He said, looking at a spot on the front of Graff's desk, I was a pain in the ass, sir. She said if I went to the belt, I didn't need to come back. I was sincerely a pain in the ass, sir. I was 18. I was in with a rough crowd. I was stupid. Graff didn't say anything to that, except, have you corresponded with her? No, sir. He stared fixedly at that spot on the desk, wondering if they might search his room and bleed his data card for it, next use he made. Maybe they already had. Not recently. I've got about 4 or 5K I'd like to send over to her account, if I could do that. She's not working. She's going to need the money. I'll talk to legal, see what the procedures are. As I said, we're going to be looking into the case. If there are strings to be pulled, maybe we can pull them. I appreciate that, sir. Are you ready to get back to work? Yes, sir. Graff keyed something on the desk comp. Glanced at it. I don't know if they can get your friends back to quarters this watch, but you're their unit commander. You have access there on any shift, if you want to check up on them. Not back to quarters? Not in this watch? His heart did a tick and a speed up. He looked at Graff, met a level I can't tell you kind of stare. What are they doing? He asked Graff. They're in there for aptitudes. It's a 4-hour test, for God's sake. You have access there. I've been over there. They wouldn't tell me a damn thing. Graff had never been one to hold back information, not under Q and not under his own administration. Now, I suggest you go over there, Graff said. That's all I can say. Didn't like the damn drugs. Didn't effing like the floating feeling. Told you stuff you didn't want to hear. Told you you'd effing die if you screwed it. And Ben didn't want to die. He sincerely didn't want to die. Fire! His heart took a jump. He felt Neg G. He went spinning away. You should feel blood pooling in your head and your feet. And he didn't. Didn't feel anything right except cold breeze on his face and his lungs getting air again. He could see the light. Felt somebody holding his sleeve. He was flat on his back in G, and Dekker was holding on to him, saying, "It's all right. It's all right, Ben." Wasn't who he wanted to wake up in the arms of. He stared at Dekker, with his heartbeat still thumping away like explosions, and recalled they were surrounded by dots, all but 6 of which were trying to kill him. Except he was in bed, and Dekker wasn't flying the ship. He took slow assessment of this fact. He took a look around the ceiling of a disgustingly barren room, recalled signing his name, and them telling him Sal was in, and him talking to the tech and screwing with the sim, because he'd been mad as hell and wanting to get court-martialed and wanting to go to bed with Sal Abujib if he had to get shot at to do it. Only viewed backwards, as he had to see it now, that sequence didn't highly make sense. Neither did Dekker sitting on his bedside. He'd come here to sit with Dekker. He wasn't in the hospital. He was in the Sims lab, and Dekker, with the scared look on his face, was holding him by the wrist. Ben? Yeah? He began to think he'd better wake up. Ben, you all right? Dekker asking really worried him. Don't agitate him. You know, somebody else said. You know the rules. Trying to give him a heart attack? What's the damn hurry? There wasn't any answer. Dekker took hold of his hand, said, "Shit." Dekker holding his hand? He'd really rather not. Unless he was dying. He didn't feel like he was dying. He stared at Dekker, made his fingers bend and his hand draw back, and decided in this moment of clarity that he wanted his foot on the floor. Ben, don't do that. Froze right there, face down in the bend of Dekker's arm, and couldn't think how to get out of that situation. Scuzzed, Dekker said. Light came back. Dekker swore at nothing in particular. That was all right. Saved him the bother. Abujib did pass? He wanted to know. Yeah. Meg? Yeah. I got 3 of you. Same condition. With which Dekker got up and stalked out. That was Dekker, all right. Boy had a lousy temper. Shit! He heard from the hall. And with that, we are going to call it for today. Hope people dug it. We're now up to Chapter 11 at about the 2/3 mark of the way through Hellburner by C.J. Cherryh. I'll figure out how far we're going next week when I figure out how far we're going next week. Alrighty, so yeah, hope people dug it. I certainly do. I have fun. I wouldn't do these if I didn't. So yeah, I do this every week. I try to start at about noon Eastern Standard Time. I've been usually a bit later than that these last several weeks. I think at the end of this month. Yeah. After next week, I'll have everything updated and organized into their proper playlists and everything, so you won't have to search around for them in the ungodly mess that is doing 3 odd streams every week. More things show up if I have connection issues like I had earlier this week, but hopefully that did not continue today. Doesn't look like it did. If it did, oops. I really don't want to have to re-record, but I'll do it if I have to. So yeah, I do other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Monday stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. This coming Monday we'll be doing everybody's most well-known, absolutely ingrained in the cultural zeitgeist game by Platinum Studios or Platinum Software.
Everybody's aware of this game, absolutely for sure. So be prepared for that. That'll be fun. And then every Wednesday I do a Warframe Wednesday stream where I do some Warframe for a couple hours. But yeah, hope people are digging this. I gotta run. As usual, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. If it's hot where you are, stay cool. If it's cool where you are, stay toasty. And yeah, otherwise, don't let current events and political decisions, specifically ones by the United States Supreme Court of the United States, by the Supreme Court of the United States, get you down, because otherwise you'll go crazy, and you would not want that, I guess. Makes me commiserate with Dekker. Sometimes you just want to strangle somebody. Alrighty, see you all later.